So at this time, I want to invite our two esteemed legislators who have been co-sponsors for the forum, Representative Lisa Damath and Representative Dave Pinto. They're going to come forward and reflect and report on the past legislative session. So thank you.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. So we are joined by I think, substantial number of folks online. So welcome to all of you. Just as we begin, a couple of remarks as well, that we had put together the agenda, and folks online, you'll see a link to that. Of course, people who are in the room, you've got it on paper, with a sort of expectation that we would have a lot of people here physically in the room. And of course, things have changed the last couple of years. And so there's a lot of different approaches that folks have. And so we will be adjusting as we go along to kind of make that work. Because you'll note in the agenda, we have a couple of sections that involve networking and engaging. And so we're going to try to sort of make that work in the different areas that we're in. We have in previous forums in the summer, we do a recap of the legislative session, and which we're about to do. We often are asking advocates and others to do those recaps. Several people in the room have actually, in fact, been asked to do that a number of times. I can see Deborah Fitzpatrick from Children's Defense Fund. Thank you for your work. And as we talked in the lead up to this, it felt like that we should stop dumping that on anybody else and have the legislators take that on. And so Representative Damath and I are here to do that. And it's a delight to be with her. Senator Jerry Ralph had been the longtime host of the forums and was here when we were last year in person. And so just thinking of him today, now that we're back together. So anything you want to say and welcome at this point, Representative Damath? Yeah, please.
Good morning. It is good to be with you, and the opportunity to be hybrid is important. Being here in person is my preference, without a doubt. I was only able to join you one time in person before we went to completely virtual. So it is good to be back. Thank you for taking the time, whether you're joining us in person or virtually. Thank you for taking the time. This is really important work. It affects everything that we do. I have 4 children. I also have 5 grandchildren, with another one coming in September. But I have to tell you, the newest one is 3 weeks old. And this is really important work, both as families, but then as business owners. And we're looking to support our workforce too. Everything that each one of you bring to this conversation and the work that we do in the legislature, without a doubt, is what we need for Minnesota, and looking for ways to improve. So looking forward to the rest of the morning. Thank you again for being here. And I look forward to the conversation.
So what we've worked out is that we are going, so we're politicians, right? So there's going to be some spin and some analysis. But so what we're going to try to do is to sort of stick to first just the facts, and then we'll provide our analysis and our spin and have some questions from you as well. And so the first set of facts here, and these first couple slides are quite text heavy, so my apologies. And our apologies, but just the context, and we're looking backwards, right? So this was a non-budget year, meaning that the 2-year budget passed in 2021, and you'll see a lot of details there, and each one of those bullets could go into, we could have exploded those into many, many slides. But just to sort of walk through that more than $500 million was spent in federal American Rescue Plan funds on childcare and early learning, that particular portion of prenatal to 3, including a CCAP rate increase, funds that providers are receiving monthly to keep them stabilized and keep them in operation, and a lot of regulatory reforms, systemic reforms, et cetera. You'll see state funding. There was some state money that went into childcare supply, and then a lot of focus on prenatal care and on those earliest weeks in terms of voluntary home visiting, the extension of postpartum health coverage, and other really great investments in prenatal care. So that was the budget. That is the budget that we are in the middle of right now, having passed in 2021. So this budget would have been a supplemental budget that would pass. And meaning the government does not shut down if it doesn't pass. And that'll become important in a couple of minutes in the presentation. We also came into the session with a significant budget surplus, the state collecting more funds than the budget was going to be spending. And then finally, I think we're all aware that there is significant political polarization in our state, and especially in our country, and disagreements about various things. So this is the broad context that we have. I'll let Representative Damath step in if there's any facts she wants to add about any of this. Do you want to? Yeah.
Yep. And when you talk about that political polarization, yes, that exists, but you can see that we both work together very well. Chair Pinto leads our early childhood committee, and we don't always see eye to eye on things, but yet the intent is to look at how we can do things better. So as much polarization as you hear out there, please know that we are working hard at, I would say the majority of the time, all you end up seeing is where we don't get along and where we crash. But yet there is a lot of things that are done and we do get along. So that bipartisan work in all areas is really important to note. Looking at the last
Hold on
session.
1 second. I'm going to categorize some of that as spin, but that's okay. Go on.
Okay. And we can joke together too. I think there is a lot of good. I guess I always try to take the more positive look on things, and there's some way to do it, but here we go spinning. This is good in person, right? This is really good. But looking at the things that we did do over the last year, a couple of things that I also want to add to what you've heard is that $500,000 for the Great Start for All Minnesota Children Task Force. That report is due February 1st of 2023. I don't sit on that task force, but that is also looking at how can we continue improving things for Minnesota, for our kids. And so that's an important thing that came out of the 21 session. Also, we appropriated $120,000 for the family child care ombudsperson. That person has been named. I don't believe that position has started yet. Or maybe it has. I see a wave in our in-person, and I look forward to learning more about that during our networking at some point. That's really important to make sure that all people have a voice in the decisions made for childcare and for early education and the early start in Minnesota. And so making sure the voices of those family childcare providers are heard, and there's a one-stop shop kind of for them to go to with additional questions because of the way they're funded. And then we've also appropriated out of 2021, $22.5 million for the family child care facility revitalization grants. I know the first round, that application opened March 29th. Second round should be coming up in August, but that is really important. So people that want to go into that industry, teaching our kids, watching our kids, helping families, that they have what they need to get started. So I will go ahead and turn it back to you.
Okay, so we've got so that's a sense of kind of where we were coming into the session and the broad context. So then we're going to talk about there was a set of proposals that came out of the House majority and the administration. Those proposals really had a ton of overlap, so we're presenting those together. And again, apologies for the fair amount of text, especially on this slide. A little bit less after this, so I know there's a lot. The setup from the structure that the administration proposed and the House ended up proposing and passing involved directing early learning scholarships. So you see this first slide has to do with subsidies for early care and learning. So this is supporting families to be able to afford that particular aspect of prenatal to 3. We're starting with this just because it's so substantial. There's a focus on having infants and toddlers, so 0 to 3, receive early learning scholarships. That's for 20,000 kids, as you can see, focused on very low income children, those 185% of poverty or below, and otherwise vulnerable. And you'll see the list there. It's not part of prenatal to 3, but just a note that we're proposing to have a voluntary pre-K program for 4-year-olds, for those same 4-year-olds through mixed delivery. So it could be with schools, Head Start, licensed childcare, significant increase for early Head Start. So again, focused on those very youngest kids. And then for the child care assistance program, a rate increase, as you'll see the federal standard, the 75th percentile. We wanted to examine paying based on cost. The administration proposed full forecasting of the program, meaning that if somebody's eligible, they just get it. The House had a slightly smaller budget target, but still wanted to prioritize the funds to make them as efficient as possible. We're expanding eligibility to a broader variety of families, including guardians and foster parents. And then also the Great Start tax credit proposed by Representative Katiza-Watun, which would have given families $3,000 per young child. I just want to note, I don't think this qualifies as spin, that this is just fact that this is all different ways to support families to be able to afford early care and learning. And you can see what a complicated system we have. We have this many different ways to possibly support that need for families. So those are the proposals in that area. Additional proposals in early care and learning to support providers of this critical service. The House administration proposed to continue the monthly stabilization grants ongoing. And there were grants to increase supply, to develop the workforce, including a grow your own program to have folks be able to expand their skills. I think it was Jim Nicolai from Elders for Infants who worked with Representative Pryor on the Brain Builder bonus to support those working with infants. And that's the most critical period of brain development. You'll see additional grants for shared services and IT and the regional assistance networks, family, friend, and neighbor providers. So a lot of different ways to support this sector, including studying who are the people actually doing this work through an early care and education workforce study. And then finally, all kinds of other stuff in the area of prenatal to 3, most notably paid family and medical leave. We want to make sure, or this was a proposal to have families parents be able to be with their kids in those critical early weeks. And you'll see the collaborative to prevent infant mortality, home visiting, and a number of things. I'll note, just as you're looking at this list, that these different things came in a bunch of different buckets. There was an education bill and a health human services bill, much of which coming out of the early childhood committee chaired by me, but not all. Some prenatal care proposals from there. You'll see a housing proposal, Homework Starts at Home, to expand that housing subsidy program to include the youngest kids and families, which they don't right now. You start qualifying when you're in school, but not before. So that came out of that committee, from out of the workforce committee, and a wide variety of things. And you see at the bottom, even more than that. So these are all proposals that came out of the administration, ended up passing the House. So this sort of sets us up on the one side of the equation. I'll let Representative Demuth talk about what's happening on the Senate side, and then we'll talk about where things went.
And I do serve in the House, so I'm not going to speak for the Senate. I just want to clarify that. But just understanding their perspective as they were looking in, watching across the street, if I can say that. But the priorities of my colleagues in the Senate were on the HHS area to make sure that we're funding those nursing homes and care providers. That was a big priority. You know that we've walked through a really difficult last 2 years. Those of you that have family members in long-term care, or you're aware of it in your communities, there are not enough workers, and those wages are low in that sector too. And so that was a priority that was talked about and really wanting to focus on. On the education side, as Chair Pinto had talked about, the difference between the education bill and then the HHS, what we do, the work that we do here in the early childhood space is a combination of both of those. And I believe that the Senate was also looking at a focus for education because we were fully funded last year. Keep that in mind. They were looking on literacy. We know that in our K-12, we have an achievement gap. And we know that the work that we do in the early childhood space needs to be supported as those kids move into that kindergarten, making sure that they don't lose what they've already gained. And so there was a focus by the Senate to make sure that literacy was the focus in this supplemental budget year.
So we came from each of those sides, and then here's where things went. Then there was an agreement between the Senate Majority Leader, the Speaker of the House, and the Governor to divide up what ended up being $12 billion over several years. I won't get into the details of how that came up, but that's that amount of money. And to allocate, as you'll see, $4 billion each for spending, for tax cuts, and then to save for the future. That agreement included $1 billion in the education bill for an education spending and $1 billion for HHS, Health and Human Services spending. Unfortunately, the conference committees were not able to, and folks were not able to reach the necessary agreement to pass those specific bills and others. And I should note too, that in some cases, not in those 2 bills, but there were several bills in other areas where agreement was reached, but it really needed to be global agreement across a bunch of different bills. So for example, higher education, an agreement was reached, but that bill did not pass because other bills didn't pass. Everything kind of had to pass together. And that was how the structure ended up working. So the session then ended with, there were a few small policy provisions that passed. Won't get into the detail now. We can answer that if folks have questions. But the key thing is that there was no spending that ended up passing in this particular area. A couple spending bills that did. So there were ongoing negotiations. Leader Miller, maybe a couple weeks ago in the Senate, said, hey, we don't think that these are fruitful any longer, and said, hey, we don't want to continue that. but there had been negotiations going on. There's certainly hope that may resurrect, and there may be a special session that would happen to then reach some agreement. But right at the moment, that is not happening. No further negotiations continuing. And in the meantime, the Walz administration does have access to some additional federal dollars from, I think, still from the American Rescue Plan. And they did announce a couple weeks ago that they're going to be allocating some funds to reduce CCAP waiting lists. That's sort of a little asterisk or endpoint on the session. So I think that's all we have on the facts of things. More that you want to say on the analysis or spin or anything, and we'll also open up to questions as well, please.
Yep, just to finish up as a reminder, then the early learning scholarships, those are currently funded at $70.7 million. So even though we didn't appropriate additional money, there is money that is still out there that is being used. And that's really important. That's a priority of mine and my caucus, is making sure that we are empowering families and kids, that they can use those dollars if they qualify for them. They can use them as what works best for their families. That doesn't look the same. Maybe people are moving to different areas. And so that's a really important priority. Also currently funded, not additional, but still currently funded, is over $900,000 for that parent child plus that home visiting piece. That is really important as we help families as they're just getting maybe newly into having kids or need some extra supports. And then again, that Head Start piece is currently funded at $25.1 million. Those are current fundings, not additional funding, but just to make sure everybody understands that we weren't leaving people high and dry. We just didn't do anything in addition or that supplemental piece.
And so maybe I'm going to provide a few thoughts as well for analysis. I will note, I think for folks who are online, you can submit questions, and Bonnie's keeping an eye out for them. And so we'll get those. For folks in the room, Jane, I think we're going to have some cards. So please raise your hand and Jane can get cards to you and you can fill those questions. Just a schedule note, I think given the way the numbers are working, that we're thinking that we're going to reduce the breaks that you'll see in the schedule, not the breaks, but the networking sessions, the 2 half-hour sessions will probably shrink to 20 minutes a piece. So we'll go a little bit longer now, especially if folks do have questions. So bottom line is, if you have a question in the room, please raise your hand and Jane will get your card, and online, please make a note. And so I'm going to provide a few analytical thoughts then too, and Representative Damon may have thoughts she wants to respond with. And I should note that part of my comment before about the spin is that it's true that there's great, wonderful individual relationships and places where members can work together productively, right? And look at this slide, right? You know, the fact is that and now I guess I'm in full spin mode, full analytical mode, so I'll just say it, right? I mean, it's true we're in the middle of a budget, and it's true that we have people sleeping in tents. We have families who are trying to decide between going to a job that will pay their rent and getting the childcare that they need so they can go to the job to pay the rent. And like, we have massive needs in the state, and we have $12 billion that can be applied to meet some of those needs. And the fact that we could not reach agreement on that, I think, is a sign, just in the first instance, that actually the significant political polarization does have an impact, and that it is actually affecting things as much as individual legislators can work together very productively, and not just in terms of relationships, but certainly work on very productive pieces of legislation. And we did see a couple of those this session. So that's part of the reason that I made that comment. I will note, I was on the Health and Human Services Conference Committee, and Representative Damon made the comment about long-term care, which is certainly a focus of the Senate, and I would argue significant focus of the House as well, along with other areas like this one. Folks who advocate in this area should be aware, and this only dawned on me in the last year or so, that there are automatic inflators built into our spending in other areas of health and human services. So the nursing homes and others do receive automatic increases, which I think is great because there is a need. So I want to make sure that I'm not being misunderstood, not criticizing that at all. As the expenses rise, we want to make sure that our seniors are living in dignity and are taken care of. And we want to make sure the same is true of those in the dawn of life, our youngest kids as well. And so right now there is, in my mind, a real discrepancy and a real, real conflict there. So I simply want to urge all of us to be aware of those differences, because that has come up in our last couple of negotiations in the budget, including in 21, resulting in the budget we have, that every year there's an increase in spending in one area, and little kids and their families have to scrap to get even a dime of increase, when we know that there's massive need. So I really would urge all of us to be aware of those. And we tend to focus on our area, and we certainly focus on the difference between early learning scholarships and CCAP and those other ways of spending money, but recognize the other ways that money is being spent and how things are working in those areas. So I'll maybe pause on that. And I don't see hands being raised in the room, and Bonnie may have not seeing anything there either. Okay, this you're all a very non-inquisitive bunch. Well, Glenn has something. Yeah. Well, let's get your well, no, here, let's hold on a second. We're gonna get what microphone in the back. Why don't Glenn, we'll get you this microphone. Why don't we do that if that's okay? And then, but yeah, thank you.
Sure. I'm going to stay seated. As you're talking about being able to work together, one of the things that feels like happens sometimes is there are these great big complicated bills, and some of the little things that are in those bills that are really good and you agree upon disappear because you can't make agreement on the big bills. Do you see, both of you, can you see any place in the coming session where there are small things that would be meaningful to our prenatal to 3 audience that you can agree upon and get past, as opposed to sticking them in big bills?
That is a really good question, and that does complicate it on all levels, not just for this topic, but on all levels. I have in the past voted against a bill because of very concerning provision that was in there, even though I agreed with a lot of the other things. And so that does make it difficult. When we talk about the global agreement, is what we kind of talked about earlier, where there were the leaders that were making a decision, this is the direction we're going to go, made it very difficult to get those 3 things through. We did pass a veterans bill. We did pass a mental health bill. Separately, those moved through, but some of these other bigger ones makes it really difficult and very complicated. What I can tell you is, going forward, I think it's very important that we do work as much as possible to get the individual priority positions passed earlier in the year. And I know there's always kind of a holdout. Well, let's wait till the end. Let's make sure that we're doing this. As Chair Pinto had mentioned earlier, that there are automatic inflators, but yet some of our other areas don't have those. I just filled up my car with gas last night before I came here, and I paid $5 a gallon. This is a strapped time. We needed relief to go to families, if nothing else, in tax relief. And I know a number of our people are seniors here. Reducing the tax on Social Security would have been a great thing to do. We couldn't get that through separate. So to your point, yes, I think we can do better. We can do things for the early childhood, the prenatal to 3, that are going to be better, but it's going to take a lot of work going forward and making sure those agreements are made and then hopefully passed off the floor and get to the governor's desk.
And Glenn, I'll maybe note that I do feel like there are, yes, there absolutely can be agreement at really small levels, and then sometimes at bigger levels. And it's I mean, absolutely. And there's sort of discussions ongoing all the time. And hopefully, and those of you who work at the Capitol or work with those who work at the Capitol, we're always looking for opportunities for agreement. I will note that the reason that we have these, and they're called omnibus bills, where there's a lot of stuff put in, is I think related to the polarization, because it means that it makes it harder and harder for leadership to get things through. And it ends up being that sort of the structure. And this has been true. My first 2 terms, there was a Republican majority. Last 2 terms have been the DFL majority in the House. And it's been used the whole time, because as things are more polarized, you don't have the situation you had, 50 years ago, where there's lots of different coalitions coming together on different bills. You can have one particular issue, people vote on that, different issue, people vote on that. It tends to be they're going to be voting on partisan lines in many ways, just because of the structure that we have. So I don't control whether those bills get put together, but I can understand why the dynamic has led leaders of different parties and different chambers to structure things that way. Having said that, the individual pieces within those bills, yeah, absolutely, there ends up being a lot of agreement and opportunity to work together on. So yeah, thanks. And I don't know if you had something else you want to say in response to, okay. Anything else in the, on the Zoom? Okay. Thank you so much. Oh yeah. Oh, I guess there is a question. Oh yeah. So we'll call Lars if there's microphone. Okay.
Is this working? You can hear me okay? Okay, great. Lars, next to with Isaiah. Nice to see you both. Thank you for being here. I didn't hear a lot about the problem in the workforce for childcare. Childcare providers are woefully underpaid, average wage around $13 an hour. It's lower than personal care attendants or long-term care workforce. It's lower than retail and so childcare providers are having a hard time attracting staff when their staff can make more at Target. Those jobs are arguably easier than caring for our youngest children in some cases. So I'm wondering what you see as the prospects for increasing compensation for childcare providers. And just related to that, I'll note that the frontline worker pay, which was one of the few accomplishments this session, which was much appreciated, did include childcare providers, but unfortunately left out the family childcare providers. So wondering, what each of you are doing to help push for inclusion of family providers.
Yeah, sure. So, a couple. Why don't I take those in reverse order? So, that issue of the reason the family child care providers were excluded, as I understand it, and I sort of only was aware of this right towards the very end, was because they are not employees. They have independent businesses, which is wonderful. And so, this is an example of something where, as soon as I became aware of it, I worked with a senator on the HHS conference committee, and we reached an agreement to get them included. And we had the language and everything. And then at the last minute on the session ends, it's midnight on Sunday, and the bill was actually coming up on the House floor, and then we were unable to get agreement from the minority to be able to bring it up and have it pass. So we had the language, we had the agreement, we had the whole thing. And that's an example of something, Glenn, where we worked together quickly to address it, but then didn't have that in place. Lars would be very supportive. And the problem now, of course, is now we're out of session, can't address all kinds of things. But absolutely, people who are doing critical work, caring for young kids, you made the reference to Target, and maybe it's easier at another job. It's also like, this is the most important work that is done in our society. And that's true of everybody. It's absolutely true of family child care providers. So I continue to be very supportive of that. The issue is, how do we, in fact, increase compensation and support for the people who do this work? Representative Damath made the mention of the Great Start for All Minnesota Children Task Force, which was established in 21 and has three goals, really, to make sure that we are having kids be prepared for school and for life, and that families are being able to have affordable early care and learning, but then the people doing that work are receiving a livable wage and receiving the support that they need and deserve. And as you've cited, and you could have gone on for days with the statistics about what a complete mess it is and how we are not supporting folks doing that work. My perspective is that we need the kinds of investments that we were trying to pass through the House to recognize that this is a sector that is broken. And just like if you just relied on families on their own to pay for K-12 education, it would be just like early education, right? There'd be way less of it than we should have. It'd be a lesser quality, whatever that means, however you define that. But the people doing that work would receive very low wages and be some real challenges. And so we want to make sure to be supporting the people doing this work so they can then support this most important part of our society and get young kids off to a great start. So thank you. I'll let Representative Damath answer.
Lars, thank you for the question. And I will also take those in reverse order. We told our family child care providers, we did provide funding at the beginning of the pandemic to say, please stay in business. We're going to support you because we need you there for our first responders and those, in those critical sectors. We asked them to do that. When it came time for the hero pay that was going to be coming through, as we found out that our family child care providers being sole proprietors left out, either we needed to include the entire industry of childcare or none is my feeling on it. So I was incredibly disappointed at how that fell. And I heard from a number of family child care providers. That again is why it is so important that we have that ombuds person for family child care providers. They're at the table advocating, saying, don't leave us out, especially in greater Minnesota, where we so depend on our family child care providers because of the way the population lays. And so that is a really important piece, and we need to do this supporting. Now, as far as the wage, that is something, we've talked about our nursing home attendants, we've talked about different sectors. It is lower for our providers, for those that are providing care, whether they're in a center or whether they're in home. Our in-home providers have less overhead costs, but yet they are making a very low wage. One of the other things, as our different grants and dollars were being allocated, again, going back to the family child care providers, they were counted as one FTE. And so they were given a certain dollar amount, but they work more than 8 hours. And so when those same dollars were being allocated to centers, they had more FTEs because they were counted at 8 hours for one FTE. Our family providers are 12 hours, basically. We need to look going forward at how we can change that and equalize when there are additional dollars coming out. One of the other things that we had talked about, I know I carried a provision on this last year, didn't make it over the finish line, but was looking at the income guidelines. And so we're at, for some of the supports, we're at 185% of federal poverty guideline, bumping that up to 200%. That would allow some relief for families, but it would also help those in the care industry too. So great question. Thank you.
And I love, okay, now there we do have some awesome bipartisan support, because yes, allowing more families and increasing the income eligibility is great. We have, I've got a question, just any hope for a bonding bill? We have children's museums waiting is what is written here. And just to remind folks, bonding bills require a greater than 50% agreement in the two chambers. So you have to have buy-in from the minority in the House, the minority in the Senate as well, which makes them that much more complicated. A bonding bill was being worked on, I gather, in the course of the session, but that tends to be sort of one of the last pieces, because then it's, on top of all the other complexities, have to add that in too. So that certainly would require a special session if it was going to be this year. And so, as with everything else, it's probably pretty challenging. Yeah, big need. Just looking to see, Bonnie, not seeing anything on the Zoom. And Jane, do we have anything? I'll maybe just because Lars's question made me think of this. I mean, ultimately, the way we're going to make progress in this area is going to be, and I know I have said this in this forum for a number of years, is going to require there to be a coalition and advocacy efforts that are all driven together, that draws from, I mean, what other issue, right, do you have? You've got parents and their providers and employers who know that they're not going to be able to expand until and unless there's affordable and accessible childcare. We know that there's this long-term need. The science says it, all of it. As we have that come together, that really is what it's going to take, is to have those who care about these issues to come together on behalf of everybody who does, and really push us. Now, this particular situation with the session, there were a lot of issues across a lot of areas that didn't advance because of have not advanced so far anyway, because of where we are. I should probably say I still hold out hope that Senate majority will come back and we'll have negotiations and be able to have a special session. But clearly this is not unique to early childhood, but the fact that through a number of years, we've had so much trouble making progress, that is something that as early childhood advocates, and I include myself in this, we really want to think about how to make it happen. So appreciate everybody taking the time. So, yeah. Yeah, please, on the bonding bill.
And Chair Pinto mentioned his answer on the bonding bill thing. No, that's okay. The other thing is the governor is the only one that can call us back. So if the governor calls us back for that special session, we will be there ready to work, whether it's a bonding bill or it's additional funding, but he's the only one. It's in his hands right now. And so we're waiting on the governor to call us back. And if that happens, we're ready to go.
Okay, so I need one more bit of spin. just to say that I think it's pretty unprecedented. The governor generally would only do that when there is an agreement between the different chambers and the different parties and all. But it is true, the governor does have the power to do so. So we're looking for one more time. Any questions? Not seeing anything. Thank you all so much, and we'll call Jane back up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Damath and Representative Pinto. That was a really great education and also just an immense amount of work you guys have done this last session and before. So, well, again, want to thank people that are here and thank people that are in the studio audience out there. And I just want to say, joining me at the podium this morning is one of the other elders for infants, and that's Glenn Palm. We have different heights for the microphone. So anyway, but we're going to be sharing responsibility for the 2 networking sessions. And what I want to just say is that, as you know, the forums have 3 goals and have always had 3 goals. And one has been to share plans among all of the advocacy groups so that we have this chance for coming together. A second is to increase our knowledge about child development and what's working in the field and what are the things that really matter that anybody who's working in this work would be irresponsible not to know, as Representative Pinto has liked to say. And the third piece has been building relationships. And that's what suffered for the last 2+ years is we have been in a Zoom world with no neural relationships. You know, it's like, if you look at what is a relationship, according to Daniel Siegel, our esteemed psychiatrist, a relationship is energy and information. And we exchange energy when we're in the same room together, when we're across the table from each other. And so in our relationship-based work, we've really we've suffered these last couple of years. So I'm grateful for all of you who are still with us, whether you're online or whether you're here. And what we want to do this morning is take some time to explore some questions with you that are going to be about where we're at. And I'm going to turn over to Glenn.
Get it right there. Thanks, Jane. We're not going to do the Dave and Lisa show here. First of all, we want to acknowledge that we've all been on sort of this roller coaster ride for the past 2 years, and not in a particularly good way. Everyone committed to young children and family well-being, these past 2 years have been difficult. First, there was the initial attention paid to early childhood and childcare, and it seemed positive in recognition of the important role that early childhood providers played to support essential workers during the pandemic. And early childhood services were finally recognized as being essential, raising hopes that pay and conditions of early childhood workforce would finally be addressed. And I would say, Lisa, in relationship to what you were saying, it's the caregivers, the early caregivers and the caregivers for the elderly who get lost in this. So there's some commonality amongst what's happening there. So we hope that we would see more, and federal funding became available during this time to help support both early childhood programs and families. However, even a large budget surplus couldn't tip the scales to invest in young children, their parents, families, and caregivers in Minnesota. We acknowledge that painful reality, and we also want to look forward today. So kind of to introduce where we're going with this, I'd like to have you think about it in a couple of different ways. We encourage you during this first part of the session to be looking inward about your experiences during the last 2 years, then outward with our guest speaker, Dr. Lauren Zubinski, learning about what is happening in other places, and finally looking forward. What should we in Minnesota be doing together to support our youngest children and families as we move forward? So we have you together, and I was surprised to see how many of you actually are here, because I had my back turned to you, and it's like people filled in a little bit. So what we would like you to do is to really, we have some questions, and we provided time for 2 rounds of networking this morning. So, and as Dave said, probably 20 minutes. We have a couple of questions, and you can see them. They're on your schedules. What challenges have families of young kids experienced over the last few years in particular? And what has gotten in the way of progress in Minnesota in prenatal to 3? So what we would like you to do is, there are sticky notes on your table. We would like you to talk with each other for the next 20 minutes. And those of you who are maybe at a table by yourself, you might want to move over so that you don't talk just to yourself. Jot down some notes. And we have a couple of places over here where you can put down your comments. What we would like to do, yeah, over on this side, there's two different spaces. Same ones. So for those of you in the room, take some time to do that. For those of you online, Bonnie is going to help you with the Jamboard instructions. So we hope that we'll hear from both of you. We'll be back on at 10:10. So take a few moments, talk with and meet new people and old friends, and we'll be with you in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
We'll be back.
All right. Want to thank you all, and you can continue putting your stickers on the wall. That's great. And just on the Jamboard, we have a digital version, which is the Jamboard, and then we have the paper version of Jamboard. And from the looks of things, we're going to have some really rich material to work with that we owe you for that, and want to thank you. So I want to just take us now to just say that we've been looking, if you will, looking back a bit on what happened to us, and what do we see as challenges. And now we want to spend some time looking outward at what are other states doing, what are sources of ideas and inspiration that we might want to give some thought to. And so it's really an honor today to welcome a woman whose name is Lauren Zabzinski, who is the Deputy Director for Early Learning Policy at the Hunt Institute. And the thing I want to just say, the Hunt Institute sponsors webinars regularly that are free and really wonderful resources for us. And so Dr. Zabzinski, in her role, supports the Institute's early learning policy work with governors, state legislators, and state administrators. And prior to joining the Institute, Lauren had extensive state-level experience in system-wide collaboration. She holds a doctorate in curriculum and instruction with a specialty in early childhood education. Her research focused on executive function and social emotional development in the birth through kindergarten years. Lauren also holds a law degree from Loyola University, where she focused on social justice reform through social emotional learning and education. Dr. Zabzinski will be sharing stories from other states about policies and approaches to creating new supports and services for families prenatal to 3. We'll have time for questions after her presentation. And again, we have index cards to write your questions, or for the online participants, you can send your questions to the chat. I think we decided. So without further ado, and turning to our screen, nice to meet you, Lauren. Thank you for being here.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for having me. It is an absolute pleasure. I will apologize that I am not there in person as much as I wanted to be, and was trying very hard to make that happen. Unfortunately, COVID finally caught up to me after 2.5 years of skirting the virus. It decided that it was my turn. So I am here in my home in North Carolina, very thankfully not sharing said virus with anybody else. But besides that, it is absolutely my pleasure to be here with you. As was said, my name is Lauren Zabzinski. I am the Deputy Director of Early Learning Policy here at the Hunt Institute. And for those who might not be familiar with our organization, the Hunt Institute was founded by our namesake, 4-term Governor Jim Hunt of North Carolina. We are a bipartisan organization that supports education policy from the entire paradigm, from early childhood all the way through to the workforce. So it is absolutely my pleasure to be here. I am excited to share some content with you. I will apologize that my slides that I have for you are a little text heavy, but the intent behind it is to be able to share with you as many state examples as there are to help maybe brainstorm and expand on the conversation and the work that was shared with you earlier in your legislative sessions, and hopefully spark some ideas to take that work even further or maybe repropose it in a different way. I will include lots of state examples, both, or well, not both, but I guess across the entire paradigm of landscapes and political landscapes, including some that pass simple acts, and then also ones that are a full legislation movement signed into law by governor, small states to large states, East Coast to West Coast, with the idea that hopefully it gives you and provides you some nice ideas for brainstorming. And then if there are any that really resonate with you all as you move forward in your conversation, we are happy to make those connections. For instance, if an example from New Mexico really resonates and you think that we can push that forward in Minnesota, we're happy to bring them forward in a conversation, make that connection, and allow you to just pick their brain in an even further detail and even more context than somebody from our organization can provide, since they were the boots on the ground doing that. I am showing slides, and I know that it will be asked. I will share a copy of all of these slides for you and with you, especially because many of them are linked to the actual text of said bill or act or department that we are referencing. So without further delay, I'm going to share my screen here and give you the visual of the slides, and also take my face out of being 20 feet tall in front of you, which I know is not the best thing to be looking at early in the morning. All right. So what we are going to cover is essentially focusing on PN3 policies. Now, a caveat to this, as we all know in this room, PN3 or prenatal to 3 is kind of, it seems like the second string in a lot of the emphasis and the policies that we are focusing on across the country. It is this paradigm of early childhood and the struggle of early childhood that we all face, that K-12 gets the attention in the conversation first. Then we've shifted to a pre-K, which is high in conversations right now across the country for 4-year-olds, which has been shifted to for 3-year-olds. And now we're slowly starting to see the conversation evolve for our 0 to 3 or prenatal to 3. So as we share examples of work that is happening, the policies usually center on 5 different areas to support this kind of prenatal to 3 or 0 to 3. Comprehensive screening connection programs, paid family leave, expanding, which was mentioned earlier this morning, expanding income eligibility for a child care financial program, or subsidies we often refer it to, income tax credits, and then of course the workforce. Now these 5 policies are recommended and supported in all of our kind of bigger national advocacy programs, as well as like research organizations such as the PN3 Center that was out of University of Texas and now is with Vanderbilt. What I wanted to focus on today are these 3 areas. These are the 3 areas, policy kind of strategies or levers that we are seeing most of our states place their emphasis and focus on. Screening and connection programs, of course, childcare subsidies and increasing eligibility and financial support, and then the workforce and the compensation of the workforce. Really excited that this is where I chose for the conversation and places to share with you, following the questions that were posed earlier this morning, one of them being around compensation. So to move us forward, and again, excuse me, I apologize for the text, but wanted to be able to make sure we are giving you the examples to have these conversations and kind of brainstorm here first. The first policy lever or area to discuss is this screening and connections of programs. And you'll see here there are quite a few states, although not the heaviest, there are a few states here who have really focused on expanding this. New Jersey last year passed their the New Jersey Home Visiting Initiative, where they took their existing home visiting program. There's an evidence-based program, comprehensive screening, and the big piece is connecting to programs statewide, and they utilize preschool development grant funds to expand this across the state. So every child, as they are sent home from the hospital, is provided an opportunity for a home visiting for that family. These visits continue and allow for the family to start making connections to the broader programs across the state. This is huge because one of the key issues we see in 0 to 3 or prenatal to 3 is entrance and access to a program. Unlike that, what we see in like a traditional school setting of a K-12 or even what we're starting to see in pre-K, a lot of families just aren't aware of the programs available to them in 0 to 3. So expanding access to a home visiting where there is an actual adult or a person, a program officer, if you will, entering into that home and being able to introduce that these programs are available has started to make a huge difference. Connecticut also established an act last year utilizing their ARPA funds, and they have a plan to follow that expansion after those funds expire to, again, establish home visiting and universal home visiting. So regardless of socioeconomic status, location across the state, all children and families are provided access to home visiting. Maryland and California are following suit, not a fully universal like New Jersey and Connecticut, but they are increasing access and supports and investments in what they refer to as their Healthy Steps model, one of the evidence-based home visiting programs. The other big lever for policy for our prenatal to 3 is the child care subsidy or the financial assistance program. And this was mentioned for you all earlier this morning about the conversations around it, the bills proposed, and where that stands. Here are a few state examples. There's actually quite a few. This has been received as one of the top policy levers to support 0 to 3. Oregon established House Bill 3017. One establishes the Department of Early Care and Learning as an independent agency, and in doing so is reforming the subsidy program. Unique because this is an example of a governance change and structure and utilizing that as a lever to adjust, reform, supplement an existing program, using that time for it to move into the new office, and then we're kind of reforming that and looking at how we are delivering that. Rhode Island passed a Rebounds Childcare Initiative. Again, another example of utilizing relief dollars, ARPA dollars in this instance, and using it to pay retention bonuses, copay slots, and startup costs. The intent behind this for Rhode Island specifically is that priority was given to providers, regardless of setting, but priority was given to providers who are serving children 0 to 3. Very unique. We did not see as many priorities like that across the country for these kind of startup costs and retention bonuses. But Rhode Island utilized that, knowing that they had the resources already in place for programs serving their 4-year-olds or their pre-K. So this was their way to complement that system. They have seen a huge intake in or uptick of the new programs that have actually started utilizing these funds that serve their 0 to 3 age group. And Vermont also passed a rule in their state to change child care federal financial assistance, adjusting the income guidelines to align to, of course, new federal poverty levels. And then instead of the market rate survey, they're looking at adjusting it to the most updated survey, which seems pretty simple, but actually is important to call out. And Vermont is also in the process of looking to a cost model, which was mentioned for you all earlier this morning, a huge and significant difference in looking at a market rate versus the cost of quality. There is a substantial gap between the two. And in providing a cost of quality reimbursement, we're actually meeting providers to the true cost of quality, it says it in the name, to what it is that they are providing to children and families versus a kind of outdated, antiquated market rate survey. Washington and New Mexico have also passed some pretty significant acts in support of childcare financial assistance. Washington has actually named theirs the Fair Start for Kids Act. And you can see it includes quite a few components to it, but some of the most interesting and I think influential pieces here is the reducing of copay for their Working Connections childcare or their childcare subsidy program, and increasing their eligibility. They are expanding, in addition to that, supports to wraparound services like mental health consultants, dual language support, complex needs for funding, and such. What this will do is also help to increase that touch point for families of 0 to 3. Again, any touch point is the opportunity to enroll them and provide access to any of the state programs. One of the number one concerns and issues, if you will, barriers to increasing access for our prenatal to 3 is the ability to just understand and know what is there and available within the state. New Mexico utilized their ARPA dollars to expand eligibility from 200% federal poverty to 400%, essentially providing a universal eligibility for the child care assistance program. New Mexico is also a great example of taking and switching from the market rate survey to a truer, more aligned cost of care. They've actually done a full research and have a lot of great content that they are able to release to share why this adjustment was made. Another policy lever, is program access and affordability. So in addition to looking at what the cost of care is and providing financial assistance to allow for that, we have quite a few states who have looked at providing and increasing access to additional programs outside of that typical child care that we might be thinking of first and foremost when it comes to access for 0 to 3. A few states have looked at prenatal care in an effort to improve birth outcomes. Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois have looked at their home visiting programs and expanded their access and accountability and oversight. A few states have looked at expanding their early Head Start, and then Delaware, Illinois, and Colorado have looked at expanding their eligibility, funding, and access to early intervention programs and services. Compensation is the other big piece here, and it's often neglected when we talk about prenatal to 3. Important, though, to bring this into the conversation. As it was mentioned earlier, in the state, childcare teachers earn just over $13 per hour. And this is for our childcare teachers prenatal to serving 5-year-olds in a childcare setting. One of the biggest issues we have when we're looking at prenatal to 3 care is having an actual environment, a spot, a place for children to go. We can talk about the importance and that these are the most influential years of development. We can showcase brain development. We can showcase what a high quality early childhood system and program looks like. We can showcase the number of children we serve in our 4-year-old programs or preschool programs versus the number of children in the state that are not being served in the 0 to 3 setting. However, if we don't have the staff to provide those settings, the conversation quickly ends. So compensation and acknowledgement of the importance of the role of an educator in a 0 to 3 setting. We are, as a nation, slowly moving our understanding from they are babysitters or it is a daycare to they are resource experts, content experts, child development experts, and it is a child care program as they are caring for the well-being and the learning and the development of children. In doing you're seeing a lot of states address compensation, not only for pre-K, but for the entire 0 to 5 system. And in doing so is making a huge movement in 0 to 3, because now they can turn and say, we have XYZ amount of qualified workforce and XYZ amount of access and availability for programs. So let's start enrolling our youngest learners. North Carolina and New Mexico have provided monthly bonus payments, again, opening that availability to 0 to 3 providers, and all setting locations and environments in the mixed delivery system. Kentucky issued a one-time $1,500 bonus. This is as a result of the pandemic for childcare providers. But what they saw as a result of this was the ability for those programs to remain open and an ability for the state to support enrollment of 0 to 3 for families to be able to turn around and re-enter the workforce or return to work post-pandemic hours. Wisconsin relaxed their eligibility requirements for wage supplement program to those who were furloughed and reduced work hours. And again, similar to Kentucky, they reduced in such a way that it included the 0 to 3 childcare providers to be able to showcase the importance of that area within the delivery system of early childhood. Vermont has done something similar to those programs who have closed. In addition, when we're looking at compensation and gathering this information, you can see here of a list of other states who are looking at some of the possibilities, whether it is an increase in base pay, benefits, opportunities for furloughed, retention awards, to try to bring back the workforce, and B, to grow the workforce. We know that compensation and your benefits are those top 2 concerns, and then we move into hours and access to supports and professional learning. So many states are exploring how they, 1, utilize their relief dollars, and 2, how they're going to continue to support the workforce and in those compensation areas moving forward. In another few that I really like to make sure to make note of here are New Hampshire and Nebraska. New Hampshire passed their Workforce Behind the Workforce Act of 2022. In doing so, they looked to finance specifically recruitment and retention utilizing bonus and benefit grants. There is a sign-on retention bonus, there is a sign-on bonus, there is a retention bonus, and there's additional benefits for participating in the state's quality rating improvement system. Probably one of the best examples of looking at a recruitment, retention, and the workforce on a entire kind of paradigm, fully reflective lens. So they've addressed benefits and bonuses to enter the workforce, to stay in the workforce, but also that inclusion of the quality rating improvement system to increase overall quality of the early childhood system within their state. Nebraska passed an aid program relating again to the workforce, also looking at that kind of recruitment and retention component. We have not heard a significant return yet on Nebraska. They are holding that data pretty close at the moment. But if it is anything related to what you're seeing in New Hampshire already, that will increase that recruitment and it will increase the retention. The key piece here, the key learning and lesson learned here is that these recruitment and these retention bonuses are accessible for the entire early childhood workforce of 0 to 5. Not specifically out of one setting like a school district, and not specific out of one age bracket like serving 4-year-olds, but instead for that entire mixed delivery system of early childhood and all of those ages. Maine and New York have also done passed some significant, looking at it in a little bit of a different lens. Maine looking at it through tax credits and issuing refundable tax credits for providers and teachers participating in the child care subsidy program. So again, using one lever to reinforce and support another lever of child care subsidy, financial assistance. If you are providing services for children and families most in need, we will support you with a tax credit. And then New York has passed their Professionals Loan Forgiveness Incentive Program. You can see here, I think this one made national news. Up to $25,000 for eligible applicants who have worked in a licensed or a registered childcare facility. This would be in addition to any federal loan forgiveness program that individual is eligible for. And you can see that they award that kind of spread across their time of service, which is also very unique. It provides instant relief and then some relief across the board. Again, eligible to any individual serving in a child care program, regardless of the age of child served. And just another kind of honorable mention, not specifically a legislative action, but Virginia, in lieu of understanding that we need to be able to identify and promote the professionalism of 0 to 3 educators, they have established their teacher recognition program. They utilize preschool development grant funds, and the program was essentially created to recognize early educators and the critical and important components of their work, improve their financial stability and reduce turnover. I make it as an honorable mention here because although it was created in the lens of and the intent of supporting the pre-K program, the kind of ripple effect to it is that in the looser, more general language that was utilized in the teacher recognition program, it is applicable to those serving 0 to 3. So they're starting to see that recognition draw down to the entire 0 to 5 kind of early childhood system. And as a result, you're starting to see the grassroots efforts begin to really provide additional supports for all adults, providing services and supports to children in that 0 to 5 area. This last one I include in here more so for your notes as I send this out to you. This is kind of a review of some of those effective strategies, the key kind of policy levers like addressing childcare subsidies or early Head Start, and some of the states associated with key movements that have been successful and look promising for the future in reference and to be able to compare kind of how they went through this process. The biggest takeaway really to this is that, of course, each state is slightly different. Their landscape is slightly different, and so the approach is slightly different. But what we have seen as common threads to the success of all of these states and these initiatives is this bipartisan support from one side of the aisle to the other, but more so too, stakeholder support and stakeholder involvement in all of these initiatives. We see kind of proposal committees being put together in which stakeholders can provide feedback, and it makes the initiative, the act, realistic, not only for those providing the services on the ground, but also for your state agencies who are the ones that will have to carry out this work, who will have to oversee and provide that oversight and that monitoring and compliance. We are seeing many of these states that have released multiple forms of marketing and communication to be able to showcase that to all layers of the system so that it is not a surprise essentially, but rather like an invested interest of all across the state. And then what we're seeing is like the other theme to success is one state leaning on another. So New Mexico, I use as an example because they passed some of their initiatives a few years ago. They have been working on certain components for quite a bit. Other states who are looking to mimic that, even as something as kind of system level as early childhood governance. Delaware is my example. Delaware has reached out to New Mexico, and they meet regularly with state system leaders and elected officials to compare lessons learned, what were some of the barriers to success and how did you navigate those through, and then they kind of implement and utilize that information to do the same thing in Delaware. Which takes me back to this presentation, and then I'll stop and pause for questions. That is the intent here. We know that often in states and in think tanks like you all right now, It feels very much like on an island, and especially because each state has its own little has its own political landscape and such. But it very much feels solo and on an island. And there's got to be other people that have done this, but I'm not sure who to reach out to. The intent of this is to provide examples of other states that have done or explored some of these policy levers to support prenatal to 3, with the option to, as some of those that are of interest to you all in your state, that we have these connections, we can make that connection and provide a further opportunity to really drill deeper and essentially pick the brains of those who have implemented the work and have done this kind of boots on the ground and established these acts or legislative movement across their state. I'm going to pause there and get a feel for audience questions, see if there's any I need to catch up on in the chat, because that disappeared in presentation mode.
That's great. Well, thank you for, first of all, from Minnesota to you. This has been wonderful. So I want to say we will take questions, and I think that there's one, I know I saw one that came in. I want to just comment that many of these strategies that you described, Minnesota's got examples of every one of them in our state, which is very interesting. So maybe that's a good segue to the question. And Bonnie, do you want to ask that one, or do you want to? I'll bring it over.
Yeah, so the question online is, who took responsibility for beginning and ongoing leadership in the various states? And is there any relationship between that and the type of P3 program?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say it absolutely varies by state, but some of it was the elected chair of a committee, someone in the kind of executive branch, maybe, that took the initiative, like Delaware is the lieutenant governor. And others, it is the state system lead. New Mexico, I would say, in collaboration with a few elected officials, was their newly appointed secretary of early childhood education. So it varies often by the state, but the commonality across whomever it is that kind of took the lead is the taking it from that idea and even out of a bill proposed to spreading the message across the state and gaining that stakeholder support. That's where we have seen the success significantly increase. Is we like to, and we hear from, and it is beneficial to hear from the constituents in which this will impact. And so when that message is shared and those stakeholders are engaged, whether that be a think tank, whether that be a committee, whether that be through the process from beginning to end, that's where we start to see a significant change in the success rate. One of the biggest lessons learned in relating to your question on how does this relate to the PN3 program, regardless of what it is that's being introduced, is to engage those who will do the work. There are considerations that they may share that maybe we didn't think of in introducing a bill, but there's also considerations that they will be able to share on how and what the reality and what a realistic timeline and capacity would look like for this organization or for this program. An example I like for that is Texas. And Texas passed a huge education reform bill in 2019 called the House Bill 3. And part of that was to increase to a universal kind of pre-K delivery model for all 4-year-olds. But prior to kind of getting that through legislation and passing, some members and advocates and stakeholders kind of formed a think tank committee. And part of what they had shared is, love the idea of universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. However, where are these millions of children going to go? We are providing for a subset of children in our school districts, and nobody has the capacity of workforce, nobody has the empty classrooms. So you're going to pass this, but how are we going to implement this? And through that think tank came a consideration for, well, if the school district now has the funds for 4-year-olds, that should open up opportunities for neighborhood programs and others in the community to provide services for 0 to 3. And what if part of this passage and part of this legislation is a requirement of a public and private partnership? So that communities are sitting together and having these conversations and saying, I, as a local education agency, have the funds and can provide services for 4-year-olds. How about you provide services for 3-year-olds? We will braid and blend funding to support our 0 to 3s. And so you're starting to see, as a result of that, which it was passed and that is included in that legislation, is public-private partnerships. You are seeing a huge increase in coalitions across the communities that really had a huge benefit during the pandemic that, of course, we couldn't think of in 2019. But you're starting to see more and more children enrolled in a mixed delivery system, starting really in those infancy years.
Very good. Anyone else with questions?
I see another one in here. How have coalitions of funders been helpful to support the work in other states? This is a phenomenal question. And hugely imperative in states, because as we all know, one of the #1 issues in trying to implement an increase in access and an increase in availability of programs is, one, identifying the workforce and the compensation question around workforce, but 2, it's funding, right? We need funds to provide for startup, we need funds to pay for teachers, we need funds to increase compensation, etc. In a lot of the examples I shared of the most recent, recognize that many of them utilized COVID and pandemic relief dollars to be able to kind of fill that void. But what we are seeing in states, in addition to that, but then also now as like a next phase of movement to funding and support, is looking at philanthropic, looking at local supports, looking at businesses to help to supplement the funding for that, sharing and utilizing this kind of springboard of the recognition that childcare received during the pandemic, the importance of that. One of our states identified their act as the workforce behind the workforce. What we are seeing, there are many states looking and reaching out to philanthropic and business to gain support and sharing. We are the workforce behind your workforce. So in order for your community or your business to be successful, your employees need a space for their children. So what if we tag team together, or what if one supports, kind of like I scratch your back, you scratch mine, right? You provide supporting for the community, we provide childcare programs, and it helps in this overall kind of economic case for the community and the state, but also like an overall success of the community supporting each other.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else? I think. Well, we want to thank you, Lauren, and also to get to meet you and see you. We will be, I believe, circling back, but also we just really appreciate the chance to. Oh, we do have one. Oh, sorry. All right, you have one more.
Practice. Okay. Thank you. Good morning. Yep, I believe so. I'll use my outside voice. Okay. Have you seen more success with broad-based coalitions working on multi-issues impacting prenatal to 3, or limited focused coalitions focusing on one of the service areas that you've identified? And then can you also speak to how you see them managing resources? Because oftentimes the perception is that we're competing over resources when really we're trying to better the experiences of our youngest children and families.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love, so I'll break it into 2 parts here as your 2-pronged question. I would love to say that we see more success in coalitions that are approaching all of the programs and kind of looking at that full basket or whole child and family approach. But the realistic answer to that is This is hard work. This is a lot of work. And early childhood in itself is a forest of topics, of programs, of funding streams. I mean, the roots, the trees, the branches, it is messy. And y'all are in it and you know that. So the idea of coming together and bringing all of those branches and roots together at once is very overwhelming, and very overwhelming to look at it from a system level. Where do you start? And the answer to that question is often with one piece, right? One step, one chunk, one solution. So as a result, we see coalitions be more successful when they break it down and they have a plan of attack. Essentially, we're going to increase home visiting. Perfect. Let's roll that out. Let's get success. Let's showcase the return on investment of that one program and what happens when we provide focused support and focused funding. Here's the return that we see on that. You can utilize that as a springboard to gain support both in your chambers of legislation, but also stakeholders and grassroots efforts and the providers that are providing the service. Then you use that to kind of add the next layer. So, okay, let's increase early intervention access, or let's increase childcare programs available to 3-year-olds. That is now successful. We have a great system in place for that. Let's increase what we're providing to 2-year-olds and keep moving it down. So as much as we want to say all of it all at once, the realistic answer is take it step by step and stage by stage, because it, one, gains the trust of those that are involved in it and those actually delivering the programs. And then 2, it helps to kind of lessons learned along the way and improve as you keep adding these programs and building those coalitions. And remind me what the second piece of the question was.
Could you also speak to how advocates in different states are managing the perceived fight over resources?
Thank you. Yes. I think this is the $1 million question of mixed delivery 101 of early childhood, right? In a mixed delivery, in a most high quality, and what we are most looking for in mixed delivery is that there is a variety of settings, a variety of environments, and a variety of program sizes and locations. So that can go from your full local school district providing for a 4-year-old classroom or pre-K, your early Head Start to a family-based childcare. And they all are important, and they all have a very significant and important role in a successful system supporting 0 to 5. And a huge piece of that is family choice. What is an appropriate setting for one family might not be the best quality setting for another family. So to be able to have that open and to be able to provide that. It is a constant struggle. And no matter which state that I am in, and no matter which state I have worked in, it is always a #1 concern, struggle, and barrier is alleviating this sense of competition. And rightfully so. The early childhood system, just historical knowledge over the past decades, has been built in this kind of competitive sense. One program receives federal funding and they provide access to their services based on X, Y, and Z eligibility. And then a new program comes along, often looking at the same eligibility as the previous federal program. And so it has fostered this sense of competition. And so what we see, regardless if we're looking at PM3 or really the 0 to 5 system as a whole, is that first step, and it relates to the previous response. The first step is to sit at the table and to really throw it all out there. And advocates are a great and important piece to this, because generally you are neutral in you don't own a specific childcare or early education program. You are advocating on behalf of the community and children and families. And so to bring together at a community level is where we see it most successful. Representation from all of those programs in that community. So a school district, usually a couple from there, and usually at the school level versus a district level with that school in the community. All of your childcare programs, a Head Start, faith-based, family childcare, a parent, often forgotten, a parent, and maybe your business or like a philanthropic support within the community, bringing them together and establishing this kind of rapport and this collaborative kind of coalition group. And then that step 2 is encouraging that trust that everyone will come forward with all of their highs and all of their lows. So we have access, we have the availability to provide access to 5,000 children within our program. But my low is I actually don't have the workforce to be able to do that. I have empty classrooms, don't have the workforce. And then somebody else at the table can say, oh, I actually have people who could enter the workforce. We just needed a place. And you start to see the kind of matchmaking happen and that mixed delivery starting to form. See another question popping up in the chat. Today we have focused on the professional support and P3. But what about the parents? Home visiting is one service, family leave is another. What are you seeing for effectiveness of programs for parents and what is needed? It's a great question. When we look at programs and the need for parents, the number one, especially post pandemic or in this new phase of pandemic, is availability and flexible hours. So availability in outside traditional hours. Childcare programs have always been and traditionally have been like a 7 to 6, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., right? And it goes into those traditional working hours of a 9 to 5. But what we see and we know, and we have known for decades, but the pandemic has really highlighted it for us, is that often families are working more than one job. There are jobs that require them to work non-traditional hours. And there are just everyday life occurrences that need that type of flexibility. And if I asked you right now to turn and talk amongst yourselves at your table and identify for me 10 childcare programs in your community that provide service outside of traditional hours, it usually is a very difficult question to answer. And so turns into the number one issue for families is, where can I go? I'm a nurse and I'm on the graveyard shift. Where can my child go for program delivery and service? And so often what that void is family and kith and kin, which is great, or the business itself, like the hospital, provides a childcare program. But they often look very different and they're not in part of this kind of mixed delivery system. So a piece to that is to include them in that. But the larger piece is to really address what the family needs and how can we, as a mixed delivery, back at that table, come together and start thinking outside the box and being able to deliver that. The second piece that we hear from families often, and what our data supports, is cost of care. Infant cost, or the cost of infant care, is generally double of what it costs for a 4-year-old, which translates into difficulty for the program to stay solvent. And of course, the reason to that is one adult per licensing requirements and really just realistic feasibility can only care for 5 to 6 infants versus 4-year-olds, you can usually have a classroom of 20 or so. So looking at that bottom line is a lot more challenging the younger that you serve. So how do we support our programs to stay solvent and not push that cost and that burden of cost onto families, which then prevents them from accessing care? And that's where we get into that childcare subsidy programs and the kind of support to the workforce that some of those states provided as an example. But it was a great question because it highlights again the importance of having families at the table.
Okay, thank you so much. And we will be, as we say, I hope, in touch again. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And as you review these slides and state examples, please be in touch and we will bring forward any of those states to have further conversations pick their brains and help to kind of brainstorm maybe direction next for you all.
That's great. I was going to say that our next section in the agenda will, with networking, will be to talk about some of the inspirations and ideas you've laid out. So we will, I expect to loop back. So thank you very much. Round of applause. Okay, I think, do you want to say a few words? And then we're going to, then Glenn's going to say a few words, and then you're going to have a chance to work one more time.
So we're making a bit of a change to the agenda here. So we're going to be having, we're swapping. No, that's okay. We're going to be on the left or the right or the right or the left. We get that adjusted. So yeah, kind of exactly. So so we're adjusting things a bit rather than coming back at 11:20, which was maybe an unrealistic way to structure the agenda. So apologies. We'll do a little wrap up now and then head into this second section, the second networking and connecting section, which is really exciting. A big thank you to Dr. Zipsinski. And just to emphasize to folks, so there's the in-person Jamboard, for those of you who can't see online, but there's the paper up, which is really just like the Jamboard you're doing online. Then you've got the online Jamboard. Can we flip to the next, flip to the next slide, actually, if we can. So you're going to be able to see that there's those of us in the room there. You also have access to the Jamboard if you want to do it that way. We will be sharing the information from these in-person online Jamboards afterwards. But hopefully this is an opportunity, whether you've been online or in person, to get reconnected, to get re-energized. There's a lot of work for us all to do in the lead up to the 2023 budget session, because that will be a budget session, to make sure that we're prioritizing young kids and families. A lot of discussion and to figure out how to do that. But know that I'm very much available. I know Representative Damath is as well. And our colleagues. I did want to note, by the way, Senator Melissa Wickland was here earlier. I'm not sure if we're joined by other elected officials online, but she's been really interested in these issues and a champion as well. So thank you so much to everybody. I'll turn things to Representative Damath.
Just want to briefly say thank you for being here. Those of you online and in person, appreciated what was presented by the doctor. It was excellent information. As Chair Pinto said, we do have a lot of work to do, but this is a great getting back into preparation and identifying what we're doing right, what we are succeeding at, where we can invest more in that, and then also what are some of our misses. How can we increase what we're doing for the benefit of our youngest kids and all Minnesotans? So thank you for being here.
So I think Jane and Glenn are now going to lead us all into the final section. So thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for sticking around. We're moving into networking part 2, which is called opportunities and idea generation. And what we want to do is build on the presentation that we just had. First, to reflect on the activities from other states and how these might be useful to us and applied in Minnesota. We also want you to focus on what needs to happen in Minnesota to make progress in prenatal to 3 in the coming year. And finally, we are asking you to give us some direction for the forum. So we have 3 sets of questions that are three different questions. And if you can do kind of what we did in the first round and look at those questions in the reports from other states, what did you find insightful or inspiring? There was so much from other states. And there's so much that's going on here, and there is so much emphasis on how complex everything is that it can be overwhelming. But hopefully, if you can take out a few points that were specifically meaningful for you, that would be great. The second question we have is, what do we need to do in Minnesota to make progress in the prenatal to 3 area? So we're looking at now moving forward. We were looked backward, we looked and inward, and we're looking outward to Texas and all over the country. And now it's time to refocus on Minnesota and what can we do? And lastly, we're asking, how can the forums help? So any suggestion changes to the forums? Today, we're doing this hybrid version, which is for us is new, and we're working our way through it. And but suggestions that you have would be welcome. So thanks again for your attention. And if you can spend a few more minutes when you feel like you're done, if you need to take a few moments to put something up on the board, that would be great. I think that's all. Jane, anything?
That's all. Yeah. Just want to also just say on behalf of the elders, Katie's here, Mary Kay's online, Sandy and Jim and Glenn is as well as online, that we're just a little group. So we, so anyway, and we're blessed with Representative Damath and Representative Pinto as co-sponsors, and obviously with St. Thomas making this really happen. So I think for our purposes today, we're going to say adieu, and we'll see you in the fall. And also that we will be sending out some notes from what happened and what we've been learning. And we know there's a lot to do, and it's also really exciting. So thank you. Really good to be with you. Bye.